Good morning and welcome to those of you who are joining us online today, because behind me, as you are seeing a lot of bowls and things, this is part of the soundscape of Tulsa with Amy Hamilton and Susan Bruschi, and we've been enjoying that vibration and that sound, and we thank you for joining us today, and it's good to see all of those of you who watch online again. As you know, I've been away for the past month. Now, I think it was like Friday, I heard from Chaz, and he said, pretty much you all behaved yourself. So what I want to know is, did Chaz? So you don't have to lie to me. I already know what the answer is, okay? So to keep everybody from asking me individually, how was your sabbatical, I figured I better answer the question and we can talk about it. This is the fourth time, for those of you who don't know, I went on a sabbatical for 30 days. It is the fourth time in my ministerial career that I have done this. And the idea of a sabbatical is really a spiritual retreat. It's to go away to some place for a continuous time period. It's not like you take a week here like a vacation. It is definitely for spiritual renewal. And the idea is to go and pretty much disconnect from everything and everyone. Well, because I'd done this before, I had some expectations of what it was going to be like, even though I had never been to this retreat center before. First and foremost, my expectation was that I would be alone. Anytime I had been at a retreat center, even though other people were there, they were away from me, and I didn't really ever see them or even engage with them. And most retreat centers, oftentimes, although it was a huge building, I might have been the only one on retreat. Secondly, my expectation was it would be a theological, liberal environment, because the retreat centers that I have been to, although they've all been Catholic, have all been in a more liberal theological tradition. And the third thing that I came with an expectation is that I would go and that, after I kind of had a little rest and renewal, it'd sort of be like an extra mini vacation with nothing to do. In all three areas, I was wrong. I went to a retreat center called Christ's Peace. It's kind of hard. Christ's Peace House of Prayer, that is about a half an hour north of Lawrence, Kansas. It's near Easton, Kansas, somewhere out in the middle of a cornfield there. And it is a Catholic retreat center, as I said. I was surprised at how big the retreat center was, because I had never been there before. And so just kind of in your mind's eye, there were like 10 cabins out in the perimeters, and at the very same time, in the main building, there was probably another 10 rooms. And as typically would happen in a retreat center, they have one big meal a day, and that's lunch. And we would gather to have that lunch. So when I walked in that first Monday, July the 2nd, I walked in and I met two other women who were also there for an extended period of time. They were actually there for 6 weeks. They are still there today. And about a week passed and another gentleman came, and he was there for a whole month too. So over the course of time, at lunchtime, our job was, to set the table and to have a time of fellowship, and then we would clean up and straighten the room up. And from that point on, then we would go back to our cabins and be in silence. So at about 2 o'clock, give or take, I would pack my dinner and pack my breakfast, and I would go back to my cabin until noon the next day. So I would not see anybody or talk to anybody. But I was surprised at even that small interaction every day. Well, I got very connected to these people. We shared a lot of journey as we walked together. Over the course of time, it was very clear that this place was not my theological tribe, shall we say. And what's interesting, because I was born and raised Catholic, and I was born and raised Catholic in the pre-Vatican time. I went to Catholic grade school, high school, and college, and so I could do the prayers. I was right in the cadence, but it was an interesting time. It was almost a double blessing, because it invited me to look at I'm going to call it my theological history, to look at what I believed when I was a child, and said, some of that's still valid today. And to once again say, I'm glad I moved on from that. I don't any longer believe that. So it was kind of an interesting thing. I read some books of the saints. I read some current day Catholic scholars, which were most fascinating. In fact, I might say they almost sound a little unity for that matter. But I really enjoyed the reading that Sister Marie had provided for me as I had asked her to do so. So it was a very interesting time of checking in with my own theological journey. But the last piece of it was the most disturbing. I shared with you before I left, it's like a bell curve. The first, when you get there, you're kind of all wound up. It's been a 5.5-hour drive, and I was there, and I was finally settled in, and, kind of looking around, checking the place out, and then there'd be that downtime of sleep. Usually that lasts, typically, 3 or 4 days. But that lasted almost 3.5 weeks. And I thought to myself, am I depressed? What's going on here? What's going on? What I realized is that when you go apart, now I know there are some of you who live alone say, I don't really need to go apart because I live alone, but it's very different being out of your own world. It's very different being totally disconnected from the internet. I called my mom and dad because my mom is not doing too well. Okay, but not real well. So I'm standing out in the middle of the field going, cellular, here I am, AT&T, I'm here. My dad says, you're fading. Oh, wait till I go over to the next corn stalk and I can get you a little bit better over here. So, for all intents and purposes, we were really out in the middle of nowhere. And I find that when you go and all of that stimulation is gone, there's one person that came with me. Me, myself, and I. And when me, myself, and I knew that we were here for an extended length of quiet, we had a lot to say. Sit down, we're going to talk. And once me, myself, and I got done talking to myself, God said, now that you're done with that, listen to me. And so it was a very difficult, emotionally, spiritually, troubling time, which I had not anticipated. Never before had I, and I thought the image that came into my mind is like any time before, it was like, a jar of water with mud in it, and I went on sabbatical, and the mud settled, and then I had clarity, and I came back with lots of plans, and refreshed, and ideas, and concepts. This time, it feels like somebody took the jar and went, and all I can see is mud. In fact, Randy asked me last night, he said, are you getting settled back in? I said, no, I am very disoriented. Did you notice I put out Pathways twice this week? Well, couldn't figure it out, so I did it again. And I thought, wow, what is going on there? A lot of processing. Slowly but surely, under the surface, there's a lot happening. I didn't go on this retreat like oftentimes people do with the big burning question. I didn't have any big burning questions in my life. Things were going pretty well. And, I wasn't seeking the answer about something. And I wondered, because we always talk about how God answers our prayer immediately. God is the immediate now moment. We're not waiting for God to show up and go, oh, yeah, Marianne, I knew you had a prayer request last week. Now let me think about it. God has already answered my prayer. So what I thought to myself is, this is interesting. Maybe it's like Jeopardy. I have to figure out the question. I've got the answer now. I don't know what the answer means. And I've got to somehow work my way back to understanding what it is, the questions that were on my heart that precipitated the time of the answering. One of the things I was aware of, too, is how, the problem with talking about a spiritual journey or your soul journey is, quite frankly, we have no words to articulate it. And all we can use are metaphor and images to try and explain what happens. Something shifts in the soul that begins to break it open. But there's an openness here in the fabric of our soul. And it happens anytime We may have an illness, a big illness, not just the cold and flu. It may happen when we have a financial problem. It may happen when we have a relationship issue, when we have an accident. Just the other night, a friend said, they went to a doctor for a typical exam and found out it wasn't so typical. And that journey that begins to happen because you ask yourself these questions, oh my gosh, how could this happen to me? And as I say, there's no burning question on my mind. All I know is that this fabric has torn. And now the job is mending that fabric to make it stronger, wholer, and richer with a new realization. So when I went up there, about 2 or 3 days before I left, in the daily word, there was Psalm 62, verse 1. For God alone, my soul waits in silence. For God alone, my soul waits in silence. And so as I was driving up there, I was thinking about, what does that mean? For God alone, my soul waits in silence. And I said, okay, well, I'm going into silence. I get that. But as I got there and reviewed sort of my theological beliefs from the past and the present, I began to ask myself, who and what is this God? Who is it that I'm praying to or praying about? And isn't what's really happening here a maturation of my idea, my concept of who and what this God is all about? Those of you who have done Lectio Divina with me, there's the word that resonates, there's the word that repels, and the word that's a synergy. Well, the word that resonated was alone, okay? God alone. I get that. Singular, complete. The word that I resisted was, guess what? Wait. Oh, that wait thing. But the word that was the synergistic word that brought it all together was God. And I found that most fascinating because I kept asking myself, who are you, God? What are you all about? I thought I knew so well when I was a child, that old theological tradition. And I thought I knew so well when I was, right as I am before I came on this retreat. And now you are calling me to say, Marianne, it's not enough. There's an infinite mystery here that we're talking about, and you cannot get up and say, hey, I have the singular answer on God. And so I'm going to tell you what God is, write this definition down, and it'll work for the rest of your life. That's not true. An infinite God is always revealing the infinite nature of the infiniteness. And as we struggle to articulate it and struggle to deal with it, we are left in an uncertain kind of space. I think it's easier to talk about it not so much in our spiritual journey, but in our human journey when, as I say, when things have happened in our life, when we've lost a loved one, when we've had a health challenge, when we've had some, challenges at work and relationships, then suddenly it's a lot easier to understand how, one day we're going along the track and everything's fine, and then the rug is taken out from under us. And we feel like, wow, what is God? Where did God go? I often hear people ask those questions. I ask them myself, where did you go? We were heading down the road. We were going fine. And things just turned upside down. And I still ponder, what was that all about? The second verse that kind of stayed with me the entire time of sabbatical is I was reading, one of the Catholic authors that Sister Marie had given me is Matthew Kelly. Very, very prolific author on the Catholic scene right now. He's written over like 20 books. He's somewhere kind of a cross between a Wayne Dyer a little bit and a Brendan Burchard, and he's very easy to read, very meaty, very powerful, and I really, really enjoyed the books that she gave me to read. And one of the days, it was early on in the book, Perfectly Yourself, I think is the title of the book, he said that one of the great passages that always spoke to him when he was in prayer and on retreat was from Matthew that said, come to me, all ye who labor and are weary, and I will give you rest. And I thought, that is it. That is exactly it. And I thought, what does come to me mean? Now, in the traditional sense and in the sense of the passage, Jesus is speaking and he is saying, come to me. And when you come to me and you lay down your burdens, I will give you rest. But I also thought, that's an interesting phrase for me to say, Jesus, come to me. I need to come to you. In other words, I need to come to the quiet. I need to come to the silence. I need to come to this time of renewal. And at the very same time, using our vernacular, I'm inviting grace to come to me. Because am I not open for that to happen? And something within me really resonated. So I had a Bible in the room, in my little bedroom, and I opened it to that passage and I put a little Post-it note right there. And every time I went by it, I would just put my hand on that Bible and say, come to me, all who labor and are weary. And I thought, wow, that really, really speaks. Body, soul, mind, weary. We get weary of carrying our human burden, don't we? We get weary of the tasks at hand. We get weary of the issues that we have, and they don't go away. Jesus didn't say, well, throw it all out and we'll start all over again. No, that's not the way it works. The way it works is we have to put our burden down for a while and to rest and renew, and then we can pick it back up again with a greater sense of power and a greater sense of inner strength, not just lugging it along, struggling with our own human power and try to have it done. Over the course of the time as I interacted with my fellow retreatants, my fellow pilgrims, it was interesting. They did not read the same book I did. They were doing different things. They were reading other things. But the idea of that we were heavily burdened became our mantra. Isn't that interesting? 4 people who never met each other, but somehow we had this mantra with each other. And when something would happen, we'd look at each other and go, we all carry a heavy burden. We all carry a heavy burden. And that became sort of the prayer mantra for each of us to agree and to understand one another on a deep soul level. We didn't have to say, could you tell me your problems? I don't have to know your problems. I know that you, like me, like all of us, carry a heavy burden. And sometimes it feels real, real heavy. And we struggle with it. So coming apart into this time was very different than the times before. The times before, I could say I came back refreshed and renewed, full of great ideas, lots of wonderful things to do. This time, not so much. This time, I'm having to live, as Rilke the poet would say, into the questions. I don't have the answers. I don't have any clarity at all. In fact, it just, as I say, seems kind of muddy. In all honesty, I woke up this morning at about 2 o'clock very fearful of coming today. Because I was feeling that I have to show something for this month off. Oh, let me tell you what I did. I won the lotto, and I read 400 books, and I wrote 7 magazine covers, and I produced. And if I didn't have anything to produce, what am I going to have to tell you? And I thought, Marianne, you're not getting it. Hello, you didn't get it back then. Let's go over it one more time at 2 o'clock in the morning. What really needs to be said is, our spiritual journey does not go from great to greater to greatest to light to light to light and beyond. But we tend to write that way. We tend to speak that way. We tend to read that way. We often encounter what St. John of the Cross called the dark night of the soul, which has no boundaries, which has no immediate end, which has no direction, and we flounder and flounder in it. And what I'm beginning to understand is the more I'm floundering in it, the less I'm understanding it. The more I have to let it go, the more I just have to say, it's okay. I'm just in the question. And someday down the road of life, whatever that question is at this moment that I got an answer for, I'll look back and I say, I think I was thinking about that on sabbatical a year ago, 5 years ago, or even another lifetime. It's important, I think, for you to understand that going away for retreat is important for me. It's important for your personal self. The House of Prayer is open to anyone. You can Google it and go there yourself. There's any number, of course, our own Osage Forest of Peace right in Sand Springs to have a time of disconnecting and quiet. And sometimes it's a wonderful time and a great experience, and you come back and go, "Whew, I feel great. That was the best thing that ever happened." But if you honestly live into that prayer, heal what needs to be healed and reveal what needs to be revealed, sometimes that revelation isn't the immediate healing. Sometimes that revelation just kind of sweeps the carpet out from under you. And it's at those times that we must honor for ourselves, and I'm speaking to myself, that we don't need to be fearful. We don't need to fix it. We don't need to run away from it. We just simply need to breathe into it. Breathe into it and allow the healing to take place, because I'm not the healer. And nor am I the revealer. I am the one who is the recipient of the grace. And so when you ask me how my sabbatical was, I'm kind of like, well, how do I say this in 2 words or less? It wasn't a lot of fun, to tell you the truth. I mean, it was a beautiful place. Food was good. Can't complain about any of that kind of stuff. I had wonderful opportunities. I met some wonderful people. I walked the grounds, saw the sunrise, saw the blood-red moon on that night in July, and just as the blood-red moon came out, a family of coyotes started to howl. It was quite neat. So there was lots of wonderful experiences. But what I know is I came back with what I'm going to call unfinished business. There's a hole in my soul, and there needs to be a mending. And so what I'm doing now is tending to my mending, so that whatever it is that is opening up for now and for the future has the opportunity to heal at depth. I want to thank all of you because you were present and supportive of the church, of one another during this time period. I certainly want to thank Chaz for filling in. I know he said he had a great time and he was really happy to be home with all of you. But I especially want to say a thank you to my wonderful husband, Patrick, because, it's got to be that support system at home, or I couldn't do what I do. And I really honor and love you much. Thank you to all. God bless.